as the leaves change color and fall brings a bite to the air. You're watching 5 after midnight. Pleasant dreams. 1.
I live in a very homogeneous area. I know everyone on my street and almost everyone in my neighborhood. Everybody is white, middle class. I had recently got a cat who I loved, but was an idiot of an animal. One day she ran up a tree with absolutely no branches and just sat at the top. The cat would not come down. I live next to a contractor who had helped get her down from another tree, but this time he said he couldn't do anything to help us. The tree was too thin, and, like I said, it had no branches until the very top. If I had to estimate, I'd say the cat was 20 to 25 feet high. I was pretty upset. I sat there waiting for her until about 2 a.m., and then I just had to go home and I passed out on the couch. At 4 a.m., I hear a really loud knocking at my door. I open it to see a man fully decked out in camo gear, including face paint. He was holding my cat. Here's the conversation we had, verbatim. In a thick Russian accent, he asks me, "Is this yours?" And I look at him and I say, "How the hell did you get her down?" He says, "I climb." I said, "That tree had no branches." He says, "In my training, I learned climb. It's no problem." And I say, "Let me pay you. Where do you even live?" He shook his head and just walked away, basically while I was mid-sentence. He had a look of concern on his face, and I don't know why. I never saw him again. I never saw another person with a Russian accent in my neighborhood again. I asked all of my neighbors, and none of them know who he might have been, and nobody recognized him from my description. And now, my cat stays indoors.
2.
My wife and I were living in a small house about 800 yards from Mexico, right on the edge of the desert. The house had a trapdoor that led to a basement-like area where we stored some boxes and other stuff. One of my co-workers was getting married, and my wife asked me to get her a pair of shoes from one of the basement boxes. I opened up the trap, climbed down the stairs, and fumble my way through the dark to the hanging light bulb. I click it, find the shoes, turn to leave, and instantly realize the entire ceiling of the basement is literally crawling with black widow spiders. At the sight of the first red hourglass on an abdomen, first one I had ever seen in person, I damn near wet myself. And the only way to get out of the basement was to walk under them all. That was the longest 20 feet I have ever traveled in my entire life, and possibly the fastest. Thankfully, I remembered the shoes. Thankfully, there was a keg of beer at the reception. I just sat there, hugging it and downing cup after cup until I stopped shaking.
3.
I've only ever experienced 2 things in my life that I could not explain. When I was a kid, my friend and I used to go on bike rides down by the river fairly often. In retrospect, I'm surprised at the amount of freedom we had in terms of curfew given how late some of them went, and I wonder if kids nowadays could get away with that. One summer night, we were riding down the same familiar bike path as always. For much of its length, The bike path winds through a sprawling park with lots of trees, creeks, etc. Near the end of our bike ride, we came to a fork in the road that we both knew from experience, joined up again at a couple 100 meters ahead. So my friend took the left path, and I took the right one, which was the primary one. I continued on until I noticed something on the path up ahead, silhouetted against the streetlights and nearby houses, that signaled the end of our bike ride and a return to a more urban environment. At first I thought it was my friend having got there ahead of me who was playing a trick on me, but as I got closer, more detail emerged. It was, to the best of my recollection, about 2 to 3 feet tall, apparently bipedal, and quite hairy, like an ape. It was just standing there in the middle of the bike path, facing me. Still not quite understanding what I was seeing, I nervously called out my friend's name. The thing did not react. It seemed to stare at me for a few more moments, then it jumped on all fours into the trees on the left that divided the bike path. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't really go back, as that would mean going all the way back alone and potentially encountering other wildlife. I just wanted to get out of there, so I decided to pedal as fast as I could past the point where the thing had been standing in the path to reach the comparative safety of the streetlights and my friend. Thankfully, I didn't see anything else as I passed that spot. I joined up with my friend and immediately asked him if that was him or if he had saw anything. It wasn't, and he didn't. We were pretty terrified at this point, so we decided to ride home as fast as we could. As the years passed, I tried to convince myself that it was a rabbit, that I had imagined the whole thing, but I really don't think so. I still don't know what it was. It just wasn't the right shape or size for a rabbit or a hare, and although I had a healthy imagination as a kid, I don't think I could have manufactured something like that, the whole cloth, and not realize I was doing it. For all of my daydreaming, I had a firm grasp on reality. Later that night, something else weird happened. I was sitting in my room watching TV, and I heard a deep cat growl. It sounded like it was inside my room, originating from the corner. I went over to check to see if my cat was there, but I couldn't see anything. I went upstairs, and my cat was sleeping on a chair, obviously having been there for a while. When I was 10 or 11, I was walking home from school one day. Normally, a group of us would walk together and then go play and ride bikes, but today I was on my own. I live in Texas, so I was kind of walking behind an alleyway between some commercial buildings on my left and wooden fences connected to people's backyards to my right. Suburbia. Also, this wasn't the upper class section of suburbia. There was one dog, a pit bull, that would always go apeshit every time we walked by the backyard. Well, on this day, as I was walking down the alley, I noticed that the gate was opening to the alley, which was also open, and the dog's head was just looking through and growling. Next thing I know, this dog is at a full sprint towards me. I just froze. I remember that the last thing I should do was run, so I kind of braced myself. Right as the beast got up onto me, it lunged and jumped straight at my throat, and I kind of ducked and twisted so that the dog just kind of got my backpack. Next thing I knew, he is on the ground, directly in front of my face. I'm kind of kneeling down like you see Batman do in comics, except now my backpack is pulled over my head like I'm a hockey player who just got his jersey pulled over his head. At about this time, the dog is rolling over to get back to its legs and come at me again, and I just stood up and kicked the shit out of this dog. I kicked it so fucking hard that when I got home I realized that I had broken my toe. I don't even know where I caught the dog, but I remember the whimper was so loud and the dog just fell over panting. I remember thinking that I hoped I killed it. At this time, the owner came running out, yelling at me like I did something wrong. I was a kid. I just took off running. My adrenaline must have been pumping because I didn't feel anything. When I got home, I needed 8 stitches in the back of my head from where the dog bit me, and a splint for my toe. To this day, I have never feared a dog after that. In fact, people are usually amazed at how, if they have a dog that usually hates everyone, they always come up to me and they always like me. Dogs don't necessarily do what I tell them, but they don't growl or bark at me. I can't explain that.
5.
I am an avid hunter outdoorsman, and I was on a hunting safari when I had a terrifying experience in the bush in South Africa, near Kruger National Park. My wife, while she doesn't hunt, wanted to tag along with her camera and take photos of everything. We also had a professional guide with us. So, we were in a Jeep driving and bouncing down a dirt road through a concession, which is a large tract of land in which you can hunt. We were scanning the hills and mountains on either side of the road for eland and kudu. We were approaching dusk, and we maybe had an hour and a half left of good light in which to hunt. The time of day will play an important part in this tale. We spotted some kudu about 300 to 350 yards out, so we stopped the Jeep and set out to get a closer look. I was armed with my .300 Winchester Magnum, my wife with her Nikon, and the guide with his wits. We set off after the kudu through the brush, a tangle of thorn bushes, and a small tree and sand. After methodically advancing on our targets for about 30 minutes, I had a shot and I took it. The kudu went down and I was excited. This is where things went bad fast. In the area where we were in is known for a very aggressive lion population. The lions become exceptionally more aggressive at night, particularly if there is wounded game about or blood in the air. With night closing in, wounded game, underarmed humans in the middle of it. We were in trouble. The guide and myself are feverishly field dressing the kudu as the sky begins to turn pink-purple, with the sun nearly beginning to disappear below the horizon. We hear the first roar. My wife and I share a nervous look around and turn our heads to the guide for reassurance. The guide says, "He's a ways off, but quickly now." That was his only comment to us as he continued to prepare the kudu without so much as a glance in our direction. There was a second roar. This time it seemed much closer. The guide shot upright like a bolt and began scanning the surrounding hills in the direction of the noise. He explained that the roar didn't mean that the lions were coming for us necessarily, because if they were, they would stalk up the brush unannounced. It is hard to catch game while roaring. It does mean that there are lions close, though, and we need to leave now. We left the kudu and started back. There was tense silence and constantly directing his weathered gaze all around us. "Lions, 3, I think," he whispered to us about 5 minutes into the walk, pointing 2 fingers out towards where he spotted them. I couldn't see anything, and it was getting quite dark. We need to move. My wife was close to tears, and my heart was pounding, and my stomach was cold. The guide whispered some instructions into his walkie-talkie for whoever was listening back at camp, and we hurried back the way we came. Our guide scrambled up onto a boulder to get a better look and indicated that the lions had spotted the kudu and they were feeding on it. This gave me some comfort, but as we continued picking our way towards the jeep and night set in, the males' roars were increasing in frequency, and my nerves were getting frayed. The guide stopped abruptly. He said, "More, not sure how many," and he started pointing in front of us this time. The lions were between us and our jeep, and I could make out some faint moving shapes in the brush that were almost indistinguishable from the surrounding fading light. "Fire a shot," he instructed me. I did, and we cautiously advanced, not knowing exactly where the lions were lurking and unable to deviate too far from our course due to the rapidly increasing darkness. Suddenly, in the distance, we heard an engine gunning and a car horn blaring. A second guide from the camp was tearing across the bush with the lights ablaze in our direction. We waved our flashlights at him, and he drove right up to us, and we piled in. The next day, we went back, and our guide told us just how much trouble we were in as he pointed out the tracks of 6 lions not more than 40 yards from where we were rescued.